Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organisation create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your host, Mark Bidwell.
Hello, this is Mark Bidwell, and welcome back to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. I've got a very special treat, I think, here for you this week. With me on the show is Professor Robert Cialdini, who is the author of one of the most impactful and influential books that I've ever read, which, as it happens, is called Influence. It's not just me who thinks this is the great book. Charlie Munger, the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, writes about it as follows: the best popular book that demonstrates 6 ways in which the quirks of your own mind will frequently prove dysfunctional to your best interests is Cialdini's Influence. And this book is really relevant for anyone wanting to influence anyone in any way. So in other words, all of us. So whether you're hiring a new team member, whether you're making a pitch for a capital investment or an innovation project, or whether you're developing a marketing plan for a new product introduction, all of the techniques and the strategies that Bob outlines both in his first book and in his new book are, I would argue, highly relevant. So 30 years after publishing his first book, he's published in the last, very, very recently, a new book called Pre-suasion, which he describes in the interview as dynamite, a revolutionary way to influence and persuade, and that only a very, very rarefied few understand. So I'm bringing this interview, making it available to you to help you understand some of these tools such that you can use them and also be aware of when they're being used on you. And in this 30-minute conversation, it becomes very clear why Bob has been described as one of the greatest social thinkers of our time. And he uses loads of examples, lots of data, and is a wonderful communicator as well. So he offers us some great advice about how to influence and persuade investors. So whether we're in a public company or whether we got venture capitalists behind our activities, how to enlist support from senior executives prior to making an important presentation, how to boost the productivity of call centers by up to 60%, and restaurants and a number of other commercial activities, and what we can learn from Warren Buffett's shareholder letters. And it's clear that he uses these tools with real integrity, and that's one of the most important aspects of one of the most important messages that Bob continues to push, is that these tools in the hands of the right people can be enormously powerful. And hence the integrity is absolutely fundamental in terms of how we wield these tools. And despite my embarrassment about getting the title of the book wrong halfway through the interview, it really was a real pleasure to have him on the show. And I look forward to hearing your feedback. I think that this book belongs on the bookshelves of anyone in business, from the CEO to the newest marketing or salesperson, as well as anyone interested in how to have a greater impact in the world. So I hope you enjoy this. Before we start, just like to invite you to join the thousands of other business leaders who've got exclusive access to our resources that are proven to make individuals and organizations more entrepreneurial, more able to deal with the challenges of the future, more able to respond quickly to some of the things that are happening in our lives and our businesses. So go to www.innovationecosystem.com, all one word. Click on join and you can sign up there and you'll get access through our newsletter. Hope you enjoy the show. This is Mark Bidwell. Welcome back to the Innovation Ecosystem. With me today is Professor Robert Cialdini, who is a worldwide expert in field research on the psychology of influence. And he's a New York Times best-selling author whose books, including Influence, have sold more than 3 million copies in 33 languages. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm glad to be with you and your followers.
So I first came across you, I remember, must have been close on 20 years ago, listening to you being interviewed by Tony Robbins on, I think it was Power Talk, talking about your first book, Influence,
which I read, I absorbed. I actually used it to launch a blockbuster product when I was working in Syngenta several years ago. And then most recently, I heard Charlie Munger talk, who's a vice president of Berkshire Hathaway, recommend your book at the Berkshire Hathaway annual general meeting. So it really is a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, I'm looking forward to the chance to exchange views with you.
So if we can just start with the first book, Influence, and in it you outline 6 principles, enduring principles of influence. And I'm curious, perhaps maybe you could just sort of remind the audience if they haven't read the book, and I'm sure they will after this, what the 6 principles are. And then since then, how has your thinking evolved around those 6 principles? Has anything become more prevalent in society? Anything dropped away of those 6 principles?
Okay, good blueprint. Let's begin with the first principle of reciprocation, the one that says people feel obligated, in fact, to give back to those who have given to them first. There's a lovely little study that shows that if people walk into a candy shop and are given a single piece of chocolate by the manager, they become 47% more likely to buy something else in that store. So that's one principle. Another is the principle of liking. No surprise that people prefer to say yes to those they like. But what research helps us to determine is what we can do to establish that rapport. A simple example is that people like those who are like them. So if we can point to a commonality or some kind of a parallel, they're significantly more likely to want to do business with us. There's a lovely little study that shows even by imitating the verbal style, the words and the kinds of phrases that people use in a negotiation, we become significantly better able to get good outcomes from that negotiation because of the rapport that's been established simply by a parallel of language style. Mm-hmm. Another principle is the principle of social proof, the one that says people want to follow the lead of multiple comparable others. It steers them in good directions without having to think too hard. There's a study I like to talk about from Beijing, which shows you the cross-cultural reach of this. Restaurant managers put a little asterisk next to certain items on their menu, which caused their selection to skyrocket. The asterisk didn't say this is one of the specialties of the house, or this is what the chef is recommending tonight. It said, this is one of our most popular items. And each one immediately became 13 to 20% more popular.
And that's social proof, which I think there's a very dark example that you give in your original book about the mass suicide, which I guess in, 1987 or something, Jamestown? Yes. And that I guess was at the heart of what compelled people to behave in such an irrational way in such large numbers of people, essentially.
It was essentially the large numbers. The multitude was the message. Mm. It wasn't the merits of that call for mass suicide that pulled them. It was the multitude of those who were listening and those who began to respond to that message that made the difference.
So that is all social proof, essentially.
It's all social proof.
Okay, super. So those are the first 3.
Another is authority, the idea that people want to follow the lead of people who know what they're talking about. There's a study I like to talk about that allows us to show how we can be more effective. Suppose we have a budget that we want to get funded, a particular feature that's going to require a certain amount of expenditure, and it's going to cost, let's say, 15,000 euros. Now, but we do our homework and we see it's going to cost 15,078 euros. So what we do is to round that off and say to whoever the funder is, please give us 15,000 euros and we'll be able to do this job. That's a mistake. If instead we say 15,078 euros, that person is more likely to see us as an expert, as someone who knows what we're talking about. And even though that's the larger figure, it's more likely to get funded at that level.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, well, I mean, that's very helpful for a lot of the listeners on the show who are struggling with how to get their ideas, through given constrained resources in large organizations. That's a lovely example, because you're absolutely right. We all round down, and you should be. It's not about rounding up. It's about being actually specific about the number, right?
Being specific. And do you recall back in school when your math or science instructors would say, on the test, I want you not just to give me the answer, I want you to show your work. Give me evidence that you know what you're doing in coming to that answer. Right? Show your work.
Yep.
That's what 15,078 does. So all we have to do is show our work, and we become seen as authoritative as a consequence.
Super. Okay.
Another principle is the principle of scarcity, the one that says people want more of those things they can have less of. There was a study done in supermarkets. Researchers went randomly to shelves and simply put beneath certain brands only 3 items per customer, and they doubled sales.
Wonderful. And sitting here in Switzerland, Bob, I mean, we have some very famous watch brands that are built on that fundamental principle.
Yes, of scarcity. So when we have scarcity, we'd be fools of the process, of the influence process, not to honestly tell people that I bought my last television set. I was in a TV appliance store, and I was looking at one particular model that was a great deal, and the salesman came up to me and said, I can see why you're interested in this, but I have to tell you it's our last one. Mark, 10 minutes later, I was wheeling that, and I wrote books on this, but I consider it I consider it information. I was informed into yes, not coerced or deceived into it. So when we have true scarcity, we'd be fools not to raise it to consciousness, because people want to know that.
I mean, I'm so pleased you mentioned that, because I think in the interview with Tony Robbins, you talked about being a patsy, which are basically, a pushover, I guess. And I also noticed in the footnotes of your new book, and we're going to come to that in a minute, you say deliberately you don't work in cults. I mean, you do a lot of work around, analyzing and getting deep undercover in the world of influence, but you don't go to cults because, I think you say in the notes that some of your colleagues have disappeared and not come back, which suggests that you, even though you're the world expert in this, you also are fully aware of the fact that as to how powerful these tools are, irrespective of what one's awareness of them is.
That's right. They're dynamite. But we can use dynamite to build bridges, or we can use dynamite to blow up bridges. And the key is to take the constructive side, I think, for ethical use.
Yeah. So I mean, you from your own perspective, as you interact with people, either explicitly or implicitly using some of these weapons of influence on you, you're fully aware of what's going on, but the television choice suggested that you actually did need a television, and it was the right decision, even though there was scarcity being applied. Is that how you think about this?
Yes, and then to be sure that I wasn't taken by this guy, I went back the next day to see if there was another one of those models in that spot, and there wasn't. He was truthful. And I considered that a positive, and I put it on a user review. I reviewed that store positively. If there had been another one, I would have done the same thing, only this time with a very negative review.
Yeah. I mean, this gets to something that I'm curious. I mean, a later question, but I'll bring it here. Is all of these tools, I guess, they only, in the hands of someone who's wielding them with integrity and with a solid basis beneath them. They are, these are good things because you're sharing, what is good with potential customers. But in the hands of someone for whom, a charlatan who doesn't necessarily have, the person who would have the sign up saying only 3 left tomorrow morning, these are dangerous, essentially.
Exactly. So that's why the ethics have to be paramount.
Yeah. Okay. Super. And then, so scarcity, and then the final one
is commitment and consistency. The idea that people want to be consistent with what they have previously committed themselves to. And there's a little study I like to talk about that my colleague Stephen Martin ran in the UK with the National Health Service. They have a problem of people who don't appear for their appointments, no-shows. And we all know what happens when we finish a medical appointment and we go to the receptionist. She gives us a card with the date and time of the next appointment on it. What Steve did was to change that procedure slightly. Instead of giving a filled-in card, she gave each patient a blank card and a pen. Mm-hmm. And asked them to fill in the date and time of the next appointment. And no-shows dropped by 18%.
Extraordinary.
Because they had made an active public voluntary commitment to that date. And they were going to live up to it. People live up to what they write down.
It's fascinating. I mean, as a manager, I would always encourage my direct reports to come up with their own objectives for the following year as a starting point. But, for that very reason, if they actually thought about it, they felt they owned it. It's far more powerful that they'd follow through versus if I just rolled out, here's the corporate objectives, this is what I expect from you. I guess it's exactly the same principle at work. Yes,
I think that is the case. And and it works. So we'd be, again, bunglers of the influence process if we failed to take that into account and steer people in desirable and profitable directions for all concerned.
Yeah. So those are the 6 principles in the 1984 book. Now, over 30 years later, you come out with the new book, Pre-fluence, which is essentially around pre-framing the influence process. So, can you just say what led up to the second book, and what surprised you most? Because I mean, these are the 6 principles endure, and they're in many respects they've been around for many years, and you've just shone a light on them and made them explicit. But can you just explain the process by which you came up with a new book, and what surprised you as you developed your thinking around pre-fluence?
Yes, well, the book is called Pre-suasion. Actually,
I'm sorry, forgive me.
Yeah, but that, of course. But the 2 things happened: one professional and one personal. The professional one was I started to see results in the academic research arena that didn't fit with the 6 principles. There seemed to be another way to get people to move in your direction without access to those 6 principles. Here's a study that was actually done by one of my colleagues. It had to do with an online furniture store that specialized in sofas. This experiment sent half of the visitors to this site to a landing page that had as its background wallpaper soft, fluffy clouds. The other half were sent to a background wallpaper site that had pennies, small coins in the background. Those who were exposed to the clouds first, the idea of softness and comfort, then rated comfort as more important as a factor in deciding what kind of sofa to purchase. They then searched the site for comfort-related information and ultimately preferred comfortable furniture for purchase. Those who were sent to the site with coins rated price as more important as a feature, searched for cost-related information, and ultimately preferred for purchase inexpensive furniture. It didn't have anything to do with the principles of influence. It was what was the idea, what was the concept that was put into consciousness immediately before they encountered the evidence for which kind of sofa they would want that steered them in a kind of biased way toward that particular concept, comfort, or cost. And the thing that was scariest about it was that when these individuals were asked afterward whether they thought this persuasive event, seeing coins or clouds, had influenced their judgments, they laughed. Of course not. I make my decision based on my internal preferences. What they didn't register was those internal preferences were shaped in the moment by what they were focused on first.
Extraordinary. So I mean, as you said, this had nothing to do with the actual influence of the interaction. This was all setting the scene for that buying, well, for the exploratory buying decisions that the individual were making. Exactly.
And here's the personal example that finally got me to say, oh, I have to think about this differently. There was a knock at my door. There was a man there asking for a contribution to a cause. It was for after-school programs for children, right? Mm-hmm. I had never heard of this particular program. He didn't show me any credentials to indicate that he was affiliated with it, and yet I gave him more money than I normally do to legitimate charity organizations. And after closing the door, I thought to myself, how did that just happen? And I realized it was something he did first. Mm-hmm. He brought along his 7-year-old daughter.
Okay.
And I was focused on children and children's issues and children's welfare.
Interesting.
And that made, just like clouds made comfort more important, that made children's welfare and children prioritized. It made them privileged in my consciousness for the next thing that happened, which was his request.
And do you feel that, I mean, how frequent is this going on in the world in which we live? I mean, do you feel that he was doing this on purpose, or do you feel that this was, was it more random, but nonetheless had the beneficial effect for his activities?
My best guess is he was doing it on purpose, but not understanding exactly why it was working. But that one time he couldn't get childcare for his daughter, and he had to bring her along, and he found that his donations skyrocketed. So he kept bringing her along. Okay. But he wasn't cognitive in a conceptual way of what happened. He knew what happened in an operational way. Yep. But the conceptual underpinnings, that was left to people like me who study the influence process.
Fascinating. Because I think one of my questions is, I mean, obviously the 6 principles from influence are, you go onto the internet and you see liking on Facebook. There's a huge amount of reciprocity for people to sign up for mailing lists. These, the social proof, these are all, pretty explicit now. But to what extent are the strategies outlined in Pre-suasion, and I still can't believe that I got the name of the book wrong. Please forgive me because I haven't got it in front of me. But to what extent are those strategies well understood, well executed, versus emerging and fairly sort of invisible in the sort of in the world of Madison Avenue or wherever the marketing's done these days?
Yeah, they are understood by a rarefied few.
Okay.
Only the aces truly understand that there's a gardening metaphor here. It doesn't matter how good this seed is that you have in your hand. If you haven't pre-treated the earth first, it's not going to bear fullest fruit. And so what the best influencers do is to cultivate the moment before their message or their request with an idea or a concept that attunes people to the strength of that message or request.
Wonderful. And the metaphor, I mean, that's an area that you cover in the book around the power of metaphors, and that wonderful story of the life insurance salesman who, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful story. And so the power of that is very compelling. Now, ACEs, let's talk about ACEs, because I know the clock is ticking, but you're a holder of Berkshire Hathaway stock. Congratulations. And I guess, as I said earlier on, you are you have a great fan in Charlie Munger. What is it that they do, I think the section in the book, maybe you can just explain, the elements of that. What's special about the annual letter which Warren writes every year, and what can with an eye on what can executives perhaps addressing their shareholders, either public or venture capitalists, what can they learn from how Warren tells his story, if you like?
What Warren does, I've never seen in any other annual report in a consistent way, and he does it regularly. On the first page or two, he describes a failure of the past year, a mistake that he made, some weakness, and he establishes his credibility for the next thing he says. And that's a strength. Mm-hmm. And that's the strength. So what he's done, and I've been getting these reports for 15 years now. It's so disarming. Mark, every time I say to myself, oh, these guys are being straight with us. What should I listen to about their position now? And now is when they present the strengths. And I have been persuaded to believe them more deeply, to process them more fully. The strengths, that's exactly what we want. And the truth is, Warren is being absolutely honest about this. He's being upfront with whatever drawback there was. Sometimes the drawback is, we were so successful last year, you can't count on the same thing next year. That's his drawback. And he brings it to the surface like no one else. And he just makes us believers. And we both benefit from it because the guy's brilliant and he's honest.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I mean, he is clearly very unique in the history of sort of American capitalism or global capitalism. But I guess the message there for people in addressing investors is be upfront with a source. Be honest about an error, and that persuades the audience for what comes next.
You know what we said about showing your work? Yeah, so if you've got a budget that's $15,078. Show your work and present it up front. If you're honest, show your trustworthiness up front.
So I mean, so for the individual, sitting in a large organization, thinking, how do I get attention of senior managers, or I've got a big pitch where I'm going to be asking for a pile of money. What are the one or two things that you would say to them that would really make a difference and give them a glimpse of these fantastic, as you say on the book cover, a revolutionary way to influence and persuade? What are the one or two things you'd give as advice for them to get on this journey, beyond, of course, buying a copy of the book?
You use the right word, and that is advice. There's research to show that if you've got a blueprint, if you've got a plan, if you've got something in mind that you want to be advanced within your organization, and you need the buy-in from colleagues or even a superior, what we typically do is show them a draft and ask for their opinion. That's a mistake. When you ask for someone's opinion, that person takes a half step back from you psychologically and goes into him or herself, introspects, separates from you. If instead you ask for that person's advice, that individual takes a half step towards you psychologically and goes into a partnership mindset. And the research shows that individual will now be more likely to support your plan. There's an old saying, when we ask for advice, we're usually looking for an accomplice, right? Well, here's what the new behavioral science says. If you get that advice, you get that accomplice.
Wonderful. And so then that triggers a consistency when they're sitting, behind the table, listening to your pitch. I mean, they're more likely to support as well.
They feel a part of it.
Wonderful.
They feel a partnership in it with you.
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm mindful of time, so I've got 3 questions, Bob, which I sent through to you. We could go on for a long time, but this is, perhaps the first question is, what have you changed your mind about recently?
On the basis of doing the research for Pre-suasion, I changed my mind about these posters that we see on the walls of certain businesses for achievement, succeed, persevere, these kinds of things. I used to think they were just silly to expect that they would have an effect. No, there's research from Canada that shows that it increased the donation amount that callers at a call center got for a university by 60% if they saw a picture of a runner winning a race in their point of view while they were making these calls.
60%?
Yeah.
It's an extraordinarily high number, isn't it?
Right.
Fantastic, yeah.
And it's just about achievement. You make achievement prominent in consciousness. You make it top of mind, and behavior follows.
Extraordinary. So excellent. So the next question, what do you do to remain creative and innovative? I mean, I have this image of you, constantly answering the door to people, trying to get money, and I just wonder, what do you do to, where's your source of creativity and innovation come from in your work and in your, how you interact with the world, if you like, Bob?
2 things. One is I go to lectures from outside my field of expertise, so I can get cross-pollination from ideas that come from areas outside of the domain of persuasion science. The second thing I do is when I want to be really creative, I either go out of doors or I go to a room with high ceilings. Because research shows that in open, expansive places, people think in open and expansive ways.
And that translates into high ceiling rooms as well.
Yes.
How remarkable.
In fact, the research was done in high ceilinged rooms.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, I've heard the first one, but not the second one, so that's remarkable. And then the final question, I mean, to what would you attribute your success? I mean, are there any specific skills or habits or mindsets that you've mastered, you think, that have really made a big impact in your professional life?
Yes, I would say empathy, putting myself in the shoes of the person I'm trying to influence, and to think about how I would react to my message if I were in that person's position. There's some research that shows that it's not so much what a recipient hears a communicator say that influences the choice. It's what the recipient hears him or herself say to him or herself. It's the self-talk. Well, what I try to imagine is if I were that person, what would I say to myself after hearing this message that Cialdini's just created, right? And I often change that message based on that change in perspective.
Isn't that interesting? It's probably a terribly difficult question to ask in practice, but I guess, or do you find it second nature now?
I do. I find that I'm much more likely to do it, but I still have to remind myself sometimes, like a checklist, right? Be sure that I've done that before I send the message off. Yeah.
Wonderful. Last question. I mean, can we expect the third book in the trilogy, called Persuasion? I mean, in terms of how to ensure that people sort of stick to their decisions and stick to their commitments, or is that a long way off, if you like?
Well, it's not a long way off because it's the final chapter of the book Pre-suasion, called Persuasion, and I've scratched the surface there and introduced a couple of ideas that people can use. But there's a whole book to be written there. It remains to be seen whether I'm the one to do it, but I know that's available for mining. There's a lot of valuable ore there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah, there's a bit in there that you touch on, but it seems to me that there is. This is, once one masters the persuasion and the actual influence, there is still there's a lot of work to be done. I would imagine, as you say, a lot to mine in that final piece. So, where can people get in touch with you, Bob? Please.
Yes, the best place is our website, Influence at Work. That's all one word, influenceatwork.com. And they can find out about my books. They can find about workshops that we do, speaking opportunities, those kinds of things.
Wonderful. Well, I'll put that in the show notes. And as I say, a great pleasure, great honor to have you on the show. Many, many thanks. And again, I can't believe I got the name of the book wrong. Please forgive me.
But, no problem at all.
And very nice to meet you. And hopefully one day we'll meet in person, Bob.
Yes, I'd like that, Mark.
Many thanks, and have a great rest of the day.
So long for now.
Okay, goodbye.
Hi, it's Mark again. A great conversation with Bob, far too short, unfortunately, and as I said, rather embarrassing that I got the name of the book wrong. I did spend a long time reading it. The footnotes are very, very rich. They're dense, but there's a huge amount in there. So highly recommend this book and also the earlier book, Influence. These are, as I said, I think these are these are fundamental books that are required reading, if you like, for anyone in business. Some things that I took away: the importance of showing your work. So when you are making a pitch, be honest as to the amount of work that you've done. Go into the detail to build confidence in the quality of your thinking and the foundations underpinning your thinking. Secondly, it's really clear to me that there are so many influencing techniques being used on us and around us in our everyday life, and it's important, I think, to be aware of them, not only to recognize when we are being influenced, but also potentially to use these tools in service of of what we're trying to achieve as well, obviously in a very, very ethical way, as Bob continually made that point in the book and also in the interview. And thirdly, a very specific point around the value of asking for advice versus asking someone's opinion, subtle but very, very transformative. I've used this approach, I suppose, inadvertently several times, and it has delivered significant value. And I think this is something that one can do straight away. I think showing your work and asking for advice, these are two things that you can, if you're making a big pitch in the next few weeks, bear those in mind. Also the feedback from, or the assessment of how Warren Buffett communicates, some really powerful ideas and concepts and strategies in here. So hopefully you can take those into your workplace, whether you're working in a large organization or whether you're an entrepreneur, and you can turn these to your advantage. Wonderful. Thank you again for listening. And if you've got some comments, please leave them on our website. Join the thousands of other business users business leaders, and access our resources via going to www.innovationecosystem.com and clicking on the join button to get access to our materials. Knowledge is not power, it's only potential power. There are a few things that you can do straight away to leverage this knowledge and to take action. Urge you to do so. Look forward to hearing how you get on. Until next week, have a great day.